I stared at my vandalized prosthetic leg, combat rage surging through my veins. Black marker defaced the patriotic design with "Follow rules" scrawled across it. After surviving Taliban ambushes, I wasn't about to surrender to some power-hungry HOA president. My name is James Anderson. At 65, I thought I'd fought all my battles. 30 years in the army, rising to colonel, surviving 3 combat tours, and earning enough medals to make my dress uniform hang heavy on one side. But life has a way of drafting you into new wars when you least expect it. The day that changed everything happened during my final deployment in Afghanistan. Our convoy hit an IED outside Kandahar. The explosion threw me 30 feet, and when I regained consciousness in a field hospital, my left leg below the knee was gone. The physical pain was excruciating, 3 surgeries, months of rehabilitation, and phantom pain that would wake me screaming, reaching for a limb no longer there. But the psychological toll was even worse. Before the injury, I'd been confident and outgoing. A leader who commanded respect, who never hesitated in the face of danger. After the amputation, that man disappeared. I became withdrawn, refusing social invitations, hiding my standard-issue prosthetic under long pants even in the summer heat. When fellow officers invited me to military functions, I declined. I retreated from the battlefield of life itself. "Colonel," my physical therapist said during one particularly difficult session, "you're healing physically, but I'm concerned about your mental state." I'd snapped back, "Focus on the leg, doctor. I'll handle my mind." But I wasn't handling it. I'd gone from commanding battalions to barely commanding myself. The turning point came 6 months after my medical discharge when a fellow veteran connected me with Veterans Forward Step, a non-profit creating customized prosthetics for wounded warriors that weren't just functional but expressive. Dr. Amelia Santos, the organization's founder and a military spouse, spent hours with me. Unlike standard VA providers, she believed prosthetics should reflect the warrior spirit of the wearer. Most medical professionals want prosthetics to be invisible, Dr. Santos explained. We believe they should be proudly visible on the veteran's terms. They designed a leg adorned with patriotic colors, my unit insignia, and combat ribbons that told my story of service. When I mentioned the cost, Dr. Santos shook her head. "This isn't just a medical device, Colonel. It's an investment in your future, your dignity, your sense of self." The day I first wore it to the VA hospital, an elderly Vietnam veteran approached me. His eyes misted as he pointed to my leg. "Now that's how a warrior walks," he said, offering a crisp salute. That moment changed everything. My prosthetic wasn't a badge of limitation but of honor, tangible proof that sacrifice could be carried with dignity. Over the next year, I gradually reclaimed my life. I began mentoring younger veterans, joined adaptive sports programs, and even started dating again. The darkness didn't disappear entirely, but for the first time since the explosion, I could see a path forward. 6 months ago, I accepted a consulting position with a defense contractor that required relocating. The opportunity came with a substantial salary increase and the chance to shape military policy that would better protect our troops in the field. I purchased a home in Oak Ridge Estates, an upscale gated community in suburban Virginia, close to the Pentagon. The neighborhood was picture-perfect, manicured lawns, coordinated mailboxes, and a homeowners association that promised to maintain community standards and property values. The houses were beautiful, neighbors seemed friendly, and I was excited about the proximity to military resources. What I failed to research was the reputation of Victoria Whitmore, the HOA president who had ruled over the community with an iron fist for 15 years. A former real estate agent in her 50s with an immaculate blonde bob and perpetually pursed lips, Victoria treated the HOA rulebook like sacred military doctrine, and herself as its commanding general. Other residents later told me they referred to her as the commandant behind her back. Our first encounter happened at the mandatory new resident orientation. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly when I walked in with my colorful prosthetic visible beneath my shorts. I noticed her slight grimace, the almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Colonel Anderson," she said later, pulling me aside. While we're delighted to have your service represented in our community, I should mention that we do have certain aesthetic standards. Medical devices should be discreet. I'm sorry, I responded, certain I'd misheard her. Your leg, she paused, waving her manicured hand vaguely. It's rather attention-grabbing, isn't it? Some residents might find it distressing. A reminder of unpleasant realities. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I looked at her perfectly composed face, searching for some sign that this was an ill-conceived joke. My prosthetic leg isn't violating any rules, I said evenly, decades of military discipline keeping my voice level. Well, not explicitly, she smiled thinly, but we do have guidelines about visual harmony in common areas. And perhaps, I replied, struggling to maintain composure, some residents need to be reminded of the price of freedom. Her smile tightened. We'll see. And see we did. A week later, the first violation notice arrived in my mailbox. Something about improper lawn edging. Then came warnings about my mailbox height, apparently 2 inches too tall, the shade of my window blinds, cream instead of white, and a small American flag stand described as excessive ornamentation. None of these alleged violations had anything to do with my prosthetic, but the message was clear: conform or be harassed. Each notice was signed with Victoria's flowing signature, each one a little dig, a reminder that I was under scrutiny. The situation escalated at the monthly HOA meeting. I had planned to propose a community fundraiser for Veterans Forward Step, the organization that had provided my prosthetic. I'd spent hours preparing my presentation, determined to give back to the organization that had helped restore my dignity. When I arrived, Victoria was seated at the center of a long table at the front of the room, flanked by other board members. Her gaze locked onto my prosthetic for a moment before she looked away with a slight grimace. Beside her sat Patricia Sheffield, a thin woman with wire-rimmed glasses who served as HOA secretary. Patricia leaned over to whisper something to Victoria, who nodded with a tight smile. Throughout the tedious first hour of the meeting, I noticed several residents glancing at my prosthetic with curiosity. Most smiled warmly when they caught my eye. A few veterans in the crowd gave me subtle nods of respect. Contrary to Victoria's concerns, no one seemed distressed. When it came time for new business, I raised my hand. I'd like to propose a community car wash to raise money for Veterans Forward Step, I said, my voice clear despite the tension. They help wounded warriors like me get custom prosthetics that restore both mobility and dignity. I've prepared a presentation about their work. Patricia cleared her throat. While that sounds worthwhile, we already have our charity calendar filled for the year. But, I started. Victoria cut me off. And frankly, we've had complaints about your prosthetic, Colonel Anderson. The room fell silent. I felt my blood pressure spike, a familiar combat readiness flooding my system. Excuse me. My voice was dangerously calm. Several residents have mentioned that the colorful thing is an eyesore, Victoria continued as if discussing an improperly placed garden gnome. We have standards in Oak Ridge. She gestured to Patricia, who began distributing printed copies of a previously unknown medical aesthetics addendum to the HOA guidelines. I scanned the document, which specified that all visible medical devices must be skin-toned or neutral in color with no personalization that could disrupt community aesthetic consistency. This was never provided during the buying process, I said. It was ratified last year, Patricia replied smoothly. Dr. Marcus Freeman, my neighbor and a physician at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center who'd been helping with my physical therapy, stood up. I don't remember voting on this. And as a medical professional, I find this deeply problematic. You must have missed that meeting, Dr. Freeman, Victoria replied dismissively. The point is, Colonel Anderson has 2 weeks to comply or face daily fines of $100. I felt a familiar sensation, the focused clarity that had saved my life in combat. We won't be complying, I said firmly. This prosthetic is medically necessary equipment, and I have the right to express myself. Then prepare for fines, Colonel, Victoria said with a cold smile. Rules are rules. As I left the meeting, several neighbors approached me to express their support quietly. Don't let her get to you, one older Vietnam veteran whispered. She does this to everyone who doesn't fit her idea of perfect. The next 2 weeks were a barrage of certified letters, each threatening increasingly steep penalties. I contacted a friend who specialized in housing law, and she confirmed what I suspected: the HOA was on shaky legal ground. The Medical Aesthetics Addendum almost certainly violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. Still, fighting would be expensive and exhausting. I was considering my options when the situation suddenly escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just returned from a meeting at the Pentagon when I noticed something on my front porch. My spare prosthetic leg, the colorful one I'd left to dry on the porch after cleaning it, had been defaced. Black permanent marker covered the patriotic artwork with the words, "Follow rules," scrolled across it. There were scratches in the finish and some of the paint had been stripped away with what looked like paint thinner. In that moment, I felt a combination of heartbreak and fury that I hadn't experienced since watching brothers in arms fall in combat. I brought the damaged prosthetic inside, my hands shaking with rage. As I was examining the damage, my doorbell rang. It was Dr. Freeman. "James, I saw you come home. Is everything okay?" His face etched with concern when I showed him the vandalized prosthetic. His expression darkened. "I think I know who did this," he said quietly. "This morning, I saw Victoria and Patricia in the neighborhood when I was jogging. They were walking from the direction of your house, looking satisfied." A cold fury settled in my chest. "Are you certain?" Just then, my phone pinged with a text message from an unknown number. "I have something you need to see. Meet me at the community garden in 20 minutes. Elijah." Elijah Cooper was the groundskeeper for our community. A quiet man in his 60s who kept to himself, but always had a respectful nod for me. He had once told me that my prosthetic reminded him of his time in the Navy, proud and distinctive. "Can you wait here?" I asked Dr. Freeman, who nodded immediately. I found Elijah nervously pacing by the tomato plants. When he saw me, he glanced around to make sure we were alone before pulling out his phone. "I didn't know who else to show this to," he said, his voice low. "They don't know I saw them." He handed me his phone. On the screen was a series of photos clearly taken from behind the garden shed. They showed Victoria and Patricia huddled together near my house, examining what was unmistakably my prosthetic leg. In one photo, Patricia was holding a Sharpie. In another, Victoria was applying something with a cloth. My hands shook with rage. "When did you take these?" "This morning. I was pruning the shrubs near your house." "They never saw me." Elijah's weathered face was grim. "I've worked here for 12 years, and I've seen how they treat people who don't fit their idea of perfect. Last year, they hounded the Martinez family because their father used a wheelchair. Before that, it was the elderly Washingtons who couldn't keep up with the lawn maintenance after Mr. Washington's stroke. But this crosses every line. Would you be willing to show these to the police?" I asked. Elijah nodded without hesitation. "Those two have bullied folks for too long. What they did to your leg, it ain't right." I thanked him and hurried home, my mind racing with a familiar tactical clarity. What Victoria didn't know was that before retiring from the military, I had served as a legal advisor to the Pentagon, specializing in service member protections. I'd kept my law license active, and Victoria Whitmore had just made the biggest mistake of her life. That night, I made 3 calls. The first was to the police to file a vandalism report. The second was to an old colleague who specialized in Americans with Disabilities Act violations. The third was to a friend who produced investigative news segments for the local NBC affiliate and had an interest in veterans issues. The next morning, I went to the police station to provide Elijah's photos and Dr. Freeman's statement. By noon, I had filed an emergency injunction against the HOA's medical aesthetics policy and a personal restraining order against Victoria and Patricia. But I wasn't done. That evening was the HOA's executive board meeting, a smaller gathering where the real decisions were made. I arrived early and took a seat in the front row. Dr. Freeman and several other neighbors, including 3 fellow veterans, joined me in silent support. Victoria faltered slightly when she saw me, but quickly regained her composure. "Colonel Anderson, this meeting is for board members only." Actually, according to HOA bylaws, Section 4.3, all homeowners may attend executive sessions as observers. I smiled pleasantly. "I've brought copies of the relevant section for everyone." Patricia shuffled uncomfortably as I distributed the papers. "Fine," Victoria snapped. "But observers do not have speaking privileges." "I'm not here as an observer," I replied calmly. "I'm here as legal counsel." The room went silent. "I don't understand," one board member finally said. I stood up, no longer the accommodating new neighbor. "My name is Colonel James Anderson, retired. Before my military retirement, I served as legal counsel to the Office of the Secretary of Defense, specializing in service member protections. I filed a lawsuit against this homeowners association and specifically against Victoria Whitmore and Patricia Sheffield for violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, destruction of medical equipment, harassment, emotional distress, and conspiracy." Patricia's face drained of color. Victoria's reddened. "That's absurd," Victoria sputtered. "We've done nothing wrong." I placed a folder on the table. "Inside you'll find copies of the police report I filed this morning, photographic evidence of you and Ms. Sheffield vandalizing my prosthetic leg, witness statements, and documentation of the systematic harassment you've directed at me since I moved in." I paused to let that sink in. Also included is a copy of the emergency injunction a judge granted this afternoon prohibiting any attempt to enforce your discriminatory medical aesthetics policy or to issue any fines against me. "You can't prove anything," Patricia whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can." I nodded to Dr. Freeman, who opened the meeting room door. In walked a police officer, followed by a reporter and cameraman from the local NBC affiliate. "Officer Davis is here to serve you both with legal papers. The news crew is here because the story of an HOA president vandalizing a disabled veteran's prosthetic leg makes for compelling viewing, don't you think?" Victoria stood up so quickly her chair toppled backward. "This is a private meeting. You can't bring cameras in here." "Actually," I countered, "the HOA bylaws you're so fond of citing specifically state that all meetings must be open to community press if requested. I have the request form right here, properly submitted last week." It was a bluff. I'd only called the news station yesterday, but Victoria was too flustered to check. "You're making a grave mistake," she hissed. "No, you made the grave mistake when you targeted a decorated combat veteran." My voice was deadly quiet. "The prosthetic you vandalized was worth $25,000. It was specially fitted to my body and designed to help me participate in normal activities with dignity. Because of your actions, I'll need costly repairs." I turned to address the entire board. "The lawsuit seeks $150,000 in damages, $25,000 for prosthetic replacement, $25,000 for medical costs, and $100,000 in punitive damages. However, I'm prepared to negotiate under certain conditions." The board members looked at me with a mixture of horror and fascination. First, Ms. Whitmore and Ms. Sheffield must immediately resign from the board and agree never to serve on any HOA board again. Second, this HOA must adopt a comprehensive non-discrimination policy specifically protecting residents with disabilities. Third, the HOA must make a $50,000 donation to Veterans Forward Step. "That's extortion," Victoria cried. "No," I replied calmly. "It's justice. And it's considerably less expensive than what you'll pay if this goes to court. Not to mention the public relations nightmare when this airs on the evening news." I nodded to the camera crew who had been filming the entire exchange. What followed was chaos. Board members began arguing amongst themselves. Patricia burst into tears, and Victoria stormed out, nearly knocking over the camera operator in her haste to escape. Within 48 hours, both Victoria and Patricia had resigned from the board. The remaining members unanimously approved my proposed non-discrimination policy and agreed to the donation to Veterans Forward Step. They also issued a public apology and arranged for a community-wide fundraiser to support the organization. The consequences extended beyond the HOA. Patricia, who worked as a school administrator in a neighboring town, was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Victoria's real estate business suffered as clients canceled listings. The police decided to pursue criminal mischief charges against both women. But the most meaningful outcome wasn't about punishment. 3 weeks after the incident, Veterans Forward Step surprised me with fully restoring my prosthetic leg, even enhancing the design. This one featured additional battle ribbons and a small inscription, "Standing tall for all who served." When I put it on for the first time since the vandalism, I felt a sense of vindication that went beyond personal satisfaction. This wasn't just about me anymore. In the months since, our community has transformed. The new HOA board consults with a diversity committee on all policy decisions. 5 other HOAs in our region have reached out to adopt similar non-discrimination policies. And I've started a veteran support group that meets weekly in our community center. I've also taken on a few veterans' rights cases again. I'd forgotten how satisfying it feels to fight for justice. Last week, at a neighborhood barbecue, a young man approached me. He introduced himself as a recently returned Marine who had lost his arm in Syria. "Sir," he said, "I heard about what you did here. It gave me the courage to be visible with my own prosthetic." He showed me his new arm, custom designed with his unit insignia. If there's one thing I've learned from this ordeal, it's that bullies thrive when good people stay silent. Victoria Whitmore picked the wrong veteran to bully, and now an entire community is better for it. If you believe in standing up against discrimination and respect our veterans' sacrifices, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your support helps us share more stories of everyday heroes fighting against those who abuse their power. Don't forget to subscribe to see more stories of justice served. Semper Fi.